This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. Thanks for joining us. We have a great show for you today. Our co-host Adam Marr is out riding what he is calling the most culturally impactful techno-infused musical dance number since Hamilton. He's shared some of it with us. I will say it will change you fundamentally as a human being.
What really inspired him was he got a pair of shoes that light up when he walks.
Oh my gosh.
And then he was brushing his teeth one morning and he was kind of doing his step aerobics, and it was lighting up, and he just started pacing. And then he said, "You guys, I need to take a beat. I'm going to miss this podcast. I'll be back."
He's inspired.
And then he was,
I mean, you ought to have seen him in those shoes at MCon. He ran everywhere. He wanted to go 3 feet. It didn't matter. He got in a 3-point stance and darted forward. It was beautiful to see. I've never seen him so happy.
And his clapping hands that you can get, it was like,
yeah.
So he's been walking around with the shoes, the glowing shoes and the clapping hands. He's like,
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear it.
It's going to be culturally impactful.
Most definitely.
Our guest today is Air Force veteran and author Ethan Brown, Senior Fellow for Defense Studies at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, which is CSPS, and much easier to say, a bipartisan think tank in Washington, D.C., which I don't think is real because I've been to Washington and it's in the Northeast, and apparently there's another one somewhere on the East Coast. Sounds like nonsense to me.
Anything that says think in it and DC doesn't make sense to me. It seems like oxymoron.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on. You were saying?
We're going to have a chat with Ethan about military recruiting and civilian military relations, as well as some of his upcoming book projects. But before that,
Oh, that's me. Did you know on this day in 2007, Amazon started selling the Kindle? Crazy.
I didn't know. Has it really been that long? I guess it has.
It has.
Yeah.
I was actually in Iraq when this dropped, but to be honest, I kept reading paperbacks because I felt like there's nothing more satisfying than opening a brand new book and it like crackling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And the smell.
Yes. Oh, and even if you get a used book, like if you go to one of those used bookstores and you trade it in, and that smell, unless you came from a smoker's house, which I would just toss it. I would not take a smoker's book. But anyway, like a book, there's nothing better than turning the page. Like, and then when you're toward the end of the book and it's almost like left heavy and you're down to like the last few pages, like, yes, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just couldn't get over that feeling. It's euphoric. But to give that up for a Kindle, I couldn't do it. Anyway.
It's hard though. Like if you've ever traveled with physical books and you're in the last like 2 chapters of one book, so you have to carry 2.
Yeah, that's true.
That can be a pain. That can be a pain.
But Joe, I didn't know you read. You're a reader?
I love to read. Joe's going to get serious here. So when I got hurt all the way back in 2004 in Fallujah, Iraq, I spent about 1.5 years in the hospital. Now I had an amazing little 3-month-old daughter. I had an amazing support system. My wife was there. My mom came and helped out. But it seems like when you're hurt, you spend time trying to comfort other people about how you're feeling. And the only like true real escape that I got from that was reading. And I reread through, I wanted something a little, kind of lighthearted. And I reread the Harry Potter series. I reread some of the books like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that I grew up reading. I reread one of my favorite series that nobody really talks about, The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. Super great young adult. I was into this King Arthur stuff when I was younger, and I read everything that just mentioned King Arthur. And that was one of the series that I think was just really impactful for me growing up. So due to that, and the fact that I got so much peace, and it was really kind of like my one true escape from the world, That was the whole reason I started writing myself, was because I figured if there's just one person out there who needs a break and can get it by something that I wrote, then that makes it worth it.
Yeah.
So, I poured a lot of my own personal experiences into that stuff. And it is, fantasy, sci-fi, stuff like that. And we can put a link for it in the show notes. I'm not trying to like promote my own stuff because it's free. It's on a free website.
What's the title of it?
It's Wayspring Wanderer on Royal Road.
Wayspring Wanderer on Royal Road. Alphas.
Yeah. A desert druid lit RPG.
Oh, sounds interesting. Alphas, go check it out. But stick around. We're going to be right back with Ethan Brown right after the break.
Military families always focus on what matters most. That's why retired uniformed service members and families of active duty military can count on Blue Cross Blue Shield FEP Vision. With open season for enrollment running now through December 9th, now's a good time to see what the benefit of Blue can do for you. Get a frame allowance and lens treatments at low or no out-of-pocket cost at eye care providers and retailers nationwide. For more coverage details and premiums, visit bcbsfepvision.com.
As a veteran, you've done more than your fair share of providing support. Now it's our turn. Introducing the WellCare and the American Legion Partnership and the WellCare Medicare Advantage plans that give you more support, more access, and more benefits in addition to your VA benefits. Visit wellcareforveterans.com today or call 844-917-1165. Ohana Health Plan, a plan offered by WellCare Health Insurance of Arizona, Inc. New Mexico Dual Eligible Special Needs Plan, DSNP members. As a WellCare by Allwell DSNP member, you have coverage from both Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid services are funded in part by the state of New Mexico. New Mexico Medicaid benefits may be limited to payment of Medicare premiums for some members.
All right, Alphas. Today we're joined by author and Air Force veteran Ethan Brown. Ethan, welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Joe, Stacy. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been listening to the last couple episodes. It's a great program you guys have, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join you guys today.
Awesome.
Oh man, it's our pleasure. Thanks for coming, Ethan, and as a fellow airman, thank you for your service, and your proof, Ethan, that Navy SEALs do not have a corner market on writing books. So
it's a bold strategy, but it's played out so far. So yeah, I'm excited to join that community as well of veteran authors. So we all have such unique experiences from all the different backgrounds. Whether it's Navy SEAL, whether it's Air Force, forward air controller. I mean, everybody's got a unique perspective to contribute to society. So it's I don't think enough veterans are taking their talents seriously enough when they separate. And it's we all have a voice, and we can go out there and make the world a better place by telling our stories, right?
you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So yes, especially now that you mention it, talking about stories. Tell me a little bit about where you're from. Are you like from the Air Force family, or were you first? What led you to the Air Force? Why TACPs? Give me a little bit of background from you.
Tell me everything you know about yourself.
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit first, right? So yeah, I grew up in western Wyoming in a small town called Pinedale. The nearest military recruiter of any kind was 2 hours away, but military service runs in my family going back. All my grandfathers both served in World War II, through the Korean War. I had a bunch of uncles who served in Vietnam through the 80s and 90s. So military service was always very prevalent in my family. My brother joined a couple years before me. He's a little bit older than I am. He spent a couple years in the Navy as a crew chief, and I always had the inclination I wanted to join the Air Force. Tried to do college. It didn't necessarily work out. I worked for about a year in the oil field there in western Wyoming, but for me, there was always going to be that call to service. So I went and found the nearest Air Force recruiter. It was up in Idaho Falls. It's about 4 hours from my hometown. Started talking to him, and I said, "Hey, I want the hardest job the Air Force has." So he's like, "Cool, you can be a combat controller." And I was like, "All right, what's that?" He's like, "Well, it's awesome. You call in airstrikes and you kick in doors and go do a bunch of combat missions." I was like, "Cool, I'll take it." So I was going through the process, working with the recruiter, and you have to go through the PAST exam for physical fitness and all these things. And there was a combat controller who provided assistance with PAST test administration, who met up with the recruiter. and we went to some local high school, and I did the run, the pull-ups, the push-ups, everything went great. And then, we get to the end of the exam, and the controller looks at me and says, all right, you got to get in the pool and swim 25 meters underwater. And I looked at him for a second. I was like, what do you mean swim? So I wasn't prepared for that. So I jump in the pool and I completely fail the swim test. The water in Wyoming's frozen 8 months out of the year. And I was just not prepared for it. So I get out and I'm all, disappointed. And he's like, well, hey man, you crushed everything else. You can just go be a TACP. So the recruiter and I looked at this controller at the exact same moment, and we both said, what's a TACP? And he said, well, it's basically combat control without swimming. So I said, that's my job right there. I'll go do that.
Perfect.
And, the rest, as they say, is history. Spent 11 years, bunch of deployments to all the different GWAT related theaters. I spent most of my time supporting the 75th Ranger Regiment down in Fort Moore. At my time, it was Fort Benning, Georgia. After 11 years, I decided it was my time to get out. I wanted to focus on spending more time with the family and getting involved in the policy discussion, which I now work for a nonpartisan policy think tank in Washington, D.C. as a military analyst. And as I think we've already mentioned, also an author. So I've got my first book coming out here. It's actually available now from the publisher and is going live with Amazon and Barnes & Noble here in about 3 or so weeks to tell the world the story of JTACs and their role during the post 9/11 wars. So,
Well, what's the title? We've talked around it, but what's the title?
right, it's Visual Friendlies Tally Target, and unfortunately, it's about 10 feet behind me, and I don't want to step up and embarrass the camera here. But yeah, it's like I said, it's on Barnes and Noble, it's on Amazon. Volume 1 is subtitled Invasions, because the first book of the trilogy is all about what JTACs did during the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Quite a few previously untold stories. So it's quite exciting for me to be able to lead this investigation, kind of tell people. A lot of it has to, a lot of the story is about the public misunderstanding about the role of air power and close air support and airstrikes and how they were used during the evolution of this 20-year war. And so volume 1, again, is all about the invasions. Volume 2 is subtitled Surges, where I focus on the surge era from 2006 to 2013. And then volume 3 is subtitled Terminus, which is a not so subtle Warhammer reference, because I'm a huge Warhammer 40K nerd.
Nice.
And it's the third book of the trilogy covers everything through the final hours of the withdrawal, so 2014 to 2021.
Wow. So you've written these books, and even worse, you've had to edit through them. And they dive into the close air support it does sort of a deep dive into the close air support mission within the global war on terrorism. So obviously as military members, I think that we like to give other people perspective, but what specifically inspired you? Because usually when you go through that amount of effort, because I don't think anybody who's never written a book understands what all is involved, but to go through that effort, there has to be a need as well, on top of that desire to share. So what inspired that need to document these experiences, and how do you think these stories help that civilian gap, and to help civilians better understand the complexities of modern warfare? And again, to touch upon a point, I don't think people realize how much things changed in 20 years of war. When you've got that much money pumping into any concept whatsoever, it's going to have generational leaps every 2 or 3 years. There's going to be prosthetics alone. My first prosthetic leg was like a hinge with a screw in it. And then now they've got this stuff that, you can run on. It's wild. So to sort of clarify my point, because I rambled a little bit, what inspired you to share these stories?
Right. Well, I was sitting there in the team room at my last unit before I was getting ready to separate, and there's a fellow there who I interviewed for volume 1, a guy named Lance McGuire, and he was one of the Air Force TACPs who was involved in the Battle of Debeka Pass in April of 2003. Now, broadly speaking, any GWAT history enthusiast is aware of the push from Kuwait up into Baghdad, going up Highway 1, the Highway of Death, and all of the big conventional forces making their way there. What a lot of people are unaware of, and as I mentioned previously, I'm getting to tell a lot of previously unknown stories. There were multiple Army Special Forces teams who went into northern Iraq in late March of 2003. And, again, a lot of people They know about the SAS teams who were working the Iraq-Syria border, doing the scud hunting mission. The Rangers were crossing the border, from the south, going and taking key airfields, and I covered some of those stories as well. But Lance was an Air Force controller embedded with the Special Forces team in northern Iraq, because the expectation was that the Iraqi army was going to keep a third of its forces south of Baghdad to sort of delay in zone the American push, while the intent was to take the other 2/3 of its total military and put them up north for absolute attrition of coalition forces, right? So the plan was to send these special forces teams in to immediately seize key terrain and upset that Iraqi battle plan. And Lance was telling this story to myself and another TACP as we were doing something completely unrelated. We were planning a training mission for a guy we had just hired onto the team. So Lance comes in and makes reference to this mission he was part of that I cover in this book. And he tells us the story very offhand, very casual. And I'll emphasize a point here about how the community of TACPs and JTACs has done themselves a disservice by not telling these stories. But Lance shares this with myself and a buddy of mine, just as a way to help us shape this upcoming training mission. And then Lamp walks out and we're all kind of sitting there in quiet. And my buddy turns over to me. He's like, damn, someone's got to start writing all this stuff down. And that was just the little seed that got planted in the back of my head, is like, I'm planning on getting out here in about a year, and I want to go do this policy research gig as a career. And, I'm going to write the book about JTACs, about TACPs and JTACs writ large. And I make the point that, TACPs have not done, for lack of a better term, branding very well. Yeah. Well, for one thing, we were too busy deploying. There were not very many of us who were JTAC qualified and able to go support ground forces in both the Iraq, Afghanistan, and later the Syrian theaters. So the public writ large is broadly unfamiliar with what a JTAC is. Navy SEALs have done a great job of branding. Army Rangers, Green Berets, even the Marine recon dudes have done a great job of telling their stories. But
Illuminati.
Just so, yeah.
Never mind him. Don't listen to that guy.
I don't know if we have time to go off on the conspiracy tangent, because I love me a good conspiracy theory for entertainment.
You're talking to a bunch of tinfoil hat people. Go for it, Ethan.
It's not even like we think everything is like, it's just we don't trust anything. So anything is plausible if you trust nothing.
Yeah, trust but verify. That's the old adage. But telling these stories is just, that seed got planted in my head because of a random conversation with a more experienced guy trying to help me develop a training plan for a new guy coming in. And originally the book was supposed to just be about the unit I was part of at that point, because it was the only unit in the entire DoD that had been continuously deployed from October 6, 2001 through the formal end of the post 9/11 wars. We had teams that was in constant rotation. And that's not that abnormal for, most of your special operations units, of course. But the point being, JTACs were literally there from the opening salvos of the post 9/11 wars until the final U.S. forces stepped on those C-17s to leave Kabul. And I wanted to just dispel a lot of the misunderstandings. I grew up in the Call of Duty generation, playing the online multiplayer. You get
Gears of War, man. Yeah,
exactly right. You get X number of victory points or whatever. You unlock the magical precision airstrike capability and left on the D-pad, right? Or you've got Hollywood depictions of a bright green laser being shined 10 meters away from good guys, and the bomb smacks Earth, and cool guys don't look at explosions as they're walking away unharmed. All of that is errant and set all of these public misconceptions about close air support. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't address the fact that there were mishaps that occurred, that there was fratricide and civilian casualties. But that misconception is that we were all out there, I say we because, I deployed many times as a JTAC, is that we were out there razing villages to the ground and just laying waste, and it was just wanton destruction. And the reality is the vetting process and the decision-making that went into every single airstrike was so comprehensive and nuanced and driven by rules of engagement. And there's a lot of the as Lance McGuire himself would denigrate, and as I mentioned in the introduction, there's a lot of no kidding, there I was, shoot 'em up, bang bang.
There I was.
Yeah, and all of us, we all love a good no kidding, there I was.
Oh yeah.
Story. those only make up a very small part of these books, in that I want people to understand how complex this entire ecosystem of capabilities were. And as you mentioned, before I went into this long diatribe about my books, the system changed so much over 20 years, right? We make the equivocation Star Wars technology, although, as I already mentioned, I'm a Warhammer guy at heart. But the guys who invaded in Afghanistan in '01, they were using paper Russian maps that had been surveyed in the 1920s, right? By the end of the war, we had these little smartphones clipped to our chest carriers and could stream aircraft video in high resolution and tell the aircraft, hey, on the third floor of that building, the second window from the right on the southwest corner, see the guy on the right, that's the top. That's the level of precision we were able to achieve after 20 years of development. And it's necessary that people understand how that evolution occurred. So I've taken a long time to explain, why did I write these books? What was the need and the purpose? That's as short of an answer as I can give for this story.
But that growth, though.
I'm so curious. Like, when you watch like shoot 'em up hoo-ha movies and you see,
Can't do it.
I know.
Can't do it.
I was gonna ask, like, how are you like cringing the whole time? Like, this just isn't reality.
It would harm my credibility to name drop a movie or some other media creation and be like, this is stupid. But it happens a lot, and I just try to internalize and keep that to myself. But yeah, that goes back to the point of these books. It's like, no, that's not how close air support works. That's not what a JTAC does. There's
So listen
my
up,
argument.
Hollywood. If you need a consultant, contact Ethan Brown.
And that's no joke.
Also known as Etan Browan.
Yeah,
that's a stage name.
Yeah,
Stage name.
Yes.
Browan.
Public name. Yeah.
I want to kind of turn focus here for a moment and talk about your think tank work in DC. First of all, what does think tank even mean? Feels like an oxymoron in DC.
Right. It's one of the great misconceptions by the American public about DC and how the swamp, as it were, how it functions, is that, man, there's a lot of really, really smart people in DC, right? You've got all these highly educated people who go there because they want to get involved in this policy discussion. And then the folks that we elect to represent us in our federal government are also generally very smart people, but they have a ton of issues that are constantly being brought to them. And when you're an individual who raises the issue of some policy topic, it's very important to you, right? Because, in my instance, one of the issues I care most about is the recruiting crisis, and then the veteran cancer epidemic, which is largely going unreported, right? Approximately 15 to 20% of GWAT veterans have been diagnosed with some form of cancer since the beginning of the post 9/11 wars, and it's criminally underreported. So these are very important topics to somebody like me, who is a veteran activist who is trying to present these issues to Congress in a professional capacity. Think tanks are sort of that filter, professionalized medium to take issues of importance and present them in a credible, research-based way, so that our policymakers are better informed to pass legislation that addresses these issues.
Yeah.
So in my instance, I work for a think tank called the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. It was actually a project commissioned by President Eisenhower back in the 50s to study the impact of good governance and domestic policy. We now have a national security cohort which focuses on foreign policy, but our harder purpose is to present bipartisan issues. A lot of these think tanks in DC, they tend to lean one way on the political spectrum or the other, because again, it's a very nuanced, myopic issue area they focus on, that they're trying to make policymakers understand. For the CSPC, our bread and butter is finding bipartisan solutions to issues that affect the entirety of the American population. So I bring that veterans issues perspective into what we do at the CSPC, and a lot of my work in particular this year, and I've been fortunate to partner with the Legion's National Security Directorate to talk about the recruiting crisis and how that impacts our national security and our military readiness. And there's all the other issues that go into that, right? Like how we take care of our veterans, and how veteran life cycle management has now impacted the American people's propensity to serve, or even simple desire to think about volunteering in the military, right? There's all these very complex issues that we try to not simplify, but condense into something that we can legislate, that our leaders can legislate off of.
Yeah, I read the document that you released recently, talking about recruitment issues, and I was kind of shocked to see that 23% of the American youth don't even qualify, or it was only 23%,
Only
only
23%. Yep.
and a lot of it is because of like overall physical and mental health
Mhm.
issues. I was stunned about that. Did you guys explore what would be needed to bring American youth up to par? I mean, I'm not saying that I need everybody like ready to join the military, but it just seems like we need to do something better, or obviously failing big time if our
Well,
youth is that sick, you know?
right. That's well, we're talking about a difficult subject here, right? Why don't young Americans want to serve their country? So let's hash out some of the uncomfortable components of this problem. There's absolutely an obesity epidemic that is harming Americans, and it's you know it's a generational thing where we live in a very well-to-do, privileged first world country. We have
Yeah.
amenities that are not generally available to most of the world. So with our privilege, we get a little bit lazy. We eat fast food. The priority of physical fitness has sort of eroded within American society writ large, which is why you have so many fitness social media influencers on Instagram and TikTok. That's why they have this cottage industry of join my workout program, buy my diet plan, right?
It
So
makes
that's
something
what
very complex seem very easy, like it's attainable to
so.
anyone with
So
with very little work.
right, but then we don't, the broader population is scrolling past that. It's a very complex issue, but I can tie all of it back to the recruiting crisis, and have attempted to do so with the report you referenced. In that, number one, we have an obesity epidemic, we have a health and wellness epidemic. When we talk about the mental health issue, man, Joe and Stacy, I know you can both attest to this, but when we were serving, back when it was hard, of course, um, mental health was a stigma
Yeah.
across the ranks of the DoD. I served in special operations, I served in combat units. Up until the time I crossed over from the conventional Air Force into the Air Force Special Operations Command, you did not go talk to a psychologist. You did not go talk to a therapist. That was immediately going to get you benched. And our purpose in doing the jobs that we chose, in my case, a TACP, I volunteered for that job because I wanted to deploy. I wanted to go serve my country and do the hard thing because it was, the right thing. I wasn't going to risk my ability to take care of my teammates or the Army platoon or company with whom I was embedded because I was getting that mental health check. And now there's this stigma mark on my record. When I crossed over to special operations, the dynamic changed where we would have behavioral psychologists embedded and attached to our unit as permanent staff. And his whole at the time I had a male doc there, and Doc J, his whole purpose was, man, I'm here to keep you guys upright. I'm here to keep you focused. You have problems, you come talk to me so we can help you. Right.
Yeah.
So the mental health dynamic has certainly improved within the DoD until we talk about recruiting. There's an example, an individual who I interviewed whose name I'll withhold. He wanted to go from being active duty Army to joining the Air National Guard. Now, during his active duty service, he had gone to get mental health help because he was going through a difficult time in his life. Well, that shows on his service record. When he's talking to this other recruiter, it's like, hey, man, you got to be more than 36 months past this whole mental health treatment thing before I can even consider bringing you in. Because that's what the official policy stated. And it's like, we're punishing people. If you've got a kid coming up through middle school and high school, which we are more aware of mental health as a society. So you have kids in middle school and high school, they're going and talking to their support counselors, they're going and talking to therapists at their high school. We should not punish them because they're getting their mental health needs addressed, right? Is it healthier that we tell them to repress their mental health issues and then go sign up? That doesn't make any sense, right? And it's not the recruiter's fault. I want to do nothing but praise our recruiting cohorts. The recruiters I've talked to, they're amazing people doing amazing things and doing the best they can, but they have no choice. It's like the regulation says, I can't bring you in unless you're 36 months past your last ADHD medication dosage. Why? Right? Or autism is another topic of discussion. There's no clarity within DoD policy about how we vet individuals who present on the autism scale, which we're talking about a difficult topic and we're addressing some uncomfortable truths. I am not the cyber warfare ones and zeros smart guy on a computer. I am the big muscular brute that goes rucking up a mountain with equipment to kill people with. That was my specialty. You do not want me engaging in cyber warfare. But if we've got an 18-year-old who has grown up their whole life learning how to code on these slick devices that we are ubiquitous within our society, and they present on the autism scale, well, that's probably somebody whose talent I could maximize putting them in a cyber warfare capacity because of their ability to hyper focus, to compartmentalize special information, right? But the DoD recruiting process does not see this dynamic. They're still stuck in, I want the big burly brawny dudes to go rucking up a mountain. And warfare has fundamentally changed, right? Yes, of course, we're still seeing tanks and trenches in Ukraine, so you still need the big brawny dudes like myself. But we need those people with different talents and who maybe present a little bit differently than what we're accustomed to seeing. And that's this discussion point with how the military's gone woke, right? Like, I hate that term because number one, there's no evidence for it. It's a baseless accusation. Or, another stigma is that the military is full of radical extremists. Well, that's not, neither one of those are fundamentally true, and there's no evidence to back those things up. None of I mentioned this actually back in August when I was at the Legion National Convention, and I was fortunate to get up on stage with a panel with Patrick Murphy, who moderated the panel, Russell Smith, former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, and then the recruiting command sergeants major of the Army and Marine Corps. And I brought this point up. I call this the REO Speedwagon theory of nobody can tell me. I interviewed over 100 people trying to put all this research together. No one can tell me what the woke is, but they heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend that they're doing X, Y, and Z in the military, and that's why it's gone woke, right? So we have these societal issues with the obesity epidemic, mental health awareness, and it not being addressed or understood properly. And then there's a public misconception about what pundits are saying about the military, all of which has this profound impact on why there's only 23% of the American population fit to serve. And if we're being honest, it's probably less than that. And now within that, less than a quarter of our population, you have to find people that even want to sign up for the military. It is such a complex issue and one that defies, well, what's the problem with recruiting and how do we fix it? There are no simple answers to a lot of questions about this issue, right? And a lot of my research this year for the CSPC, I've tried to address that in a comprehensive way. But the bottom line, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of different things we have to address in order to resolve this issue.
I want to touch upon a point that it's kind of a side note that had not crossed my mind. So when we were growing up, we're jumping over creeks, we're falling out of trees, we're wrecking our bikes. And I'm not talking about we grew up in this world where all those things were cool, but man, those summers, man, they were. But what I mean by that is my son's soccer coach, his first year was like, he initially coached baseball, and he said kids would show up and were cracking bones in their hips and things like that because they did not grow up in the woods. They didn't grow up running around. They show up and they're in like reasonably decent shape. They are reasonably athletic, but there's a forging that happens over time. Anyone who's been in the gym for 10 years is going to be stronger than somebody who's naturally strong because something happens with all that pressure and all that stuff. And he was saying that kids were like cracking their hips and stuff. And so I don't think that people realize that we're building long-term problems that are going to affect our children, because even if somebody isn't cracking a hip, what happens with any injury by the time you turn 60? You're like, hey, what was that from? I mean, I'm 43 and I'm already like, what the heck was that? Was that when I fell out of the pine tree, or was that like falling out of a Humvee,
Right. Right. No, I was going up the stairs of my house, playing with my dog, and I slipped and caught my ankle on the edge of one of the steps, and I'm still feeling it, right? And I'm only
Yeah.
34, but no, you bring up a really good point, and it requires more in-depth investigation, right? I don't want to make a broad statement saying, oh, kids are softer nowadays, but I already made the
Because there's some
comment
tough
earlier.
SOBs out there. Like you're right.
Oh,
It's,
yeah,
there's
100%.
data points.
Yeah. There is research to back up your assertion about, there's a preponderance and a higher probability of orthopedic injuries with younger generations coming in. Um, I love what the Army has done in their future soldier preparatory course, which they've incorporated into their recruiting program, where, I went and talked to the recruiter. I went and took a physical exam, and then I went to MEPS and I went to basic training, and that was that. But again, I grew up, working on a ranch and hiking the mountains of
Mhm.
Wyoming. But it's just everyone has a different perspective, which, let's face it, that's one of the things that makes the military great is you are integrated into a collective group of people you otherwise would have never met. And then you
Yeah.
become this uniform body, right, for this greater purpose. But coming from kids coming from different backgrounds, maybe they were athletes, maybe they were sports athletes, whatever. But the Army focusing on preparing these young Americans through a development program, I think is one of the most important changes to the recruiting approach. And unfortunately, it hasn't been picked up across the DoD. The Army's done a great job. The Navy has begun experimenting with it. The Marines do a tremendous job with their recruiting. But of course, they're a smaller branch, so their
And they've got good
thresholds.
branding. They really
They do.
do. Yeah.
And one thing, and I brought this up back in August during the national convention, and I want to reiterate it here, and I talk about it in my report as well. The reason the Marines are so successful, and we're talking about recruiting and why it works or doesn't. Man, the Marines put their recruiters up on a pedestal, right? They
Yeah.
have professionalized it. They have given it all the credibility in the world. It is incentivized as a position. Stacy and Joe, from think back to when you were in uniform and you were doing this job that you volunteered to do and you invested your time, energy, and effort. Or for me, being a special operations forward air controller, I had the best job in the world, right? I told pilots where to drop bombs. If my command chief had come to me and said, hey, Sergeant Brown, you're getting a special duty reassignment to go be a recruiter, I would not have been happy about that. I would have fought that tooth and nail
Yeah.
because the Air Force did not put that prestige on recruiting. Whereas the Marines, man, those are your best and brightest Marines are the ones who go do the recruiting gig. And then they come right back to their units and go on to be successful Marines, right? The remainder of the DoD would be well served to replicate the Marines model while also incorporating other components like the Army has the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. Because it's just you don't want to send your kid to the recruiter. If my boys turn 17, 18 years old and they're thinking about military service, I don't want to take them to a recruiter. And it's not the best thing that the Army or the Navy or the Marines or the Air Force has to offer, right?
Mm.
Again, it's public perception. It's how the public perceives the military in this very complex ecosystem of inputs and perceptions. And of course, we live in a society. I keep grabbing my phone as a quick reference.
We live in a
We
society.
we consume information 15 seconds at a time on these little evil black boxes. So it's getting more difficult to have a comprehensive or in-depth conversation about what can the military do for you? Why does it benefit you to go volunteer 4, 6, 12, 20 years of your life, right? But some components of the DoD recruiting have dramatically improved, and some of these cohorts are doing a great job. But so much of it comes down to how the American people perceive the military. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't include the fact that the military is suffering from politicization by our American body politic, where we drag them into these discussions about the military's gone woke. Oh, the military's
Yeah.
full of radical ideologies, right? Those things also have a profound negative impact on whether some young American, regardless of their background, would even consider joining. If I come from a disenfranchised demographic, and I'm hearing on the news because I don't know somebody, I don't have an uncle that serves, right?
Yeah.
Or I come from a big city where I'm not near a military base, and all I hear on the news is there's radical extremists in the military. What would incentivize me to join, right?
Yeah. Because
It's
it's not the money.
no, it's The compensation is another issue, right? The DOE with private enterprise and civilian marketplaces. We've recovered from COVID largely. What's the financial incentive to join, right? People have to look at the bottom line nowadays
Yeah.
of, I don't think we have time to talk about service and veteran healthcare as another struggle to try to get more Americans to join. But yeah, it's a complex issue. It really, really is.
Yeah, that's
It's
we could do this for 2 hours, man. I'll get fired up with you.
Yeah, I know, like, I come from a long military family, and my stepchildren watched my husband and I deploy for, a long time. And them watching us gave them fatigue. And
Yeah.
that was one of the biggest reasons they cited for not wanting to enlist themselves. And I heard from a number of children who come from legacy families, military legacy families, that was their reasons for not wanting to enlist. So those 23% of American youth who did qualify that come from legacy families, I think in your report you did cite that as well, as that being at war for over 20 years was an impact on recruitment as well. Is that true?
Absolutely. In fact, the first bit of published research that I posted as I started this investigation into the recruiting crisis, I wrote an article for the Modern War Institute at West Point called "The Ghost of GWAT," and it's that exact dynamic that you mentioned. It's that the reason we're struggling to recruit Americans is we spent 20 years engaged in a war that had, number one, no political end state, no clear political. What was the political objective for going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq? Um,
Freedom.
and
Democracy.
yes, yeah, that's a great Helldivers 2 reference there. I love it. But and I talk about this in my books too, right? Again, I didn't want the books to just be a bunch of bang bang shoot 'em up stories. I'm a policy guy. I have to fold the policy analysis into these great stories of we spent 20 years engaged in this war that had no clear political outcomes. It had no coherent grand strategy. And it wasn't even a 20-year long war. I don't think of
Yeah.
it in those terms. This was 20 separate 1-year wars where the strategy never matriculated into what, right? So
There's
the
no
purpose
win condition.
Right. The purpose of grand strategy is the allocation of military capabilities, resources, the ways and means to achieve an outcome that is clearly defined by a political body responsible for sending that military to engage in a conflict. We lacked both of those things in the post 9/11 wars. I use the JTAC stories as an example of this critical, fundamental capability that essentially underwrote the entire war, and our tactical success calling in airstrikes, shaping the outcome of gunfights, had this misconstrued perception within our policymakers that, oh, we can drop all these bombs, we can do all these amazing things with these special operations forces, and that's going to result in a strategic outcome that we want, even though we can't clearly state it ourselves. So we perpetuate. It's almost like JTAC created this flawed success paradigm that kept the war going for as long as it did. And the American people sat there watching this, and there was this societal fatigue of 2 American soldiers killed in a roadside bomb, 4 U.S. Marines killed in a complex ambush. The American people were exhausted of it. And when we get to August of 2021, we load up the birds and we go home, and the TV is just all you can see is waves of the Taliban rolling in towards
Yeah.
Kabul. 20 years later, all that blood and treasure, and for what?
So
Give me a
I
reason why a young American would want to join the military with that as, if they grew up watching that. Now incentivize that 18-year-old to go sign up for service. That's a tough ask.
I really wish we had more time because I feel like we started to touch on strategic competition and there's so many facets to that. I'd love to have you come back at some point and us dive into that point specifically, but unfortunately we we got to close it out. But dude, the time that you've spent with us, the effort you've put into what you're doing is very clear. It's obvious that you're an expert. And I think there's a difference between people who have it naturally and people who work hard. And then there are those rare people that's got a little bit of both. And I can see that you have a natural, proclivity towards this type of thing, but also you've done the work to get there. That those long cardio days that we were joking about earlier, you got to put in that work. So it means so much that you've spent time with us here today. But before you sign off, is there anything else that you want to share with our alphas that we didn't get a chance to discuss? We'll also have your social handles and links that we've talked about in our show notes. You got a website or something the alphas can go to learn more about your work?
Well, I'm on X at Liberty Stoic, and then I'm on Instagram at Ethan Brown Author. So feel free to follow me there. Yeah, one comment I'll make to bolster the work that you guys are doing here with the podcast and the Legion writ large is that trying to redress this recruiting crisis issue comes down to a lot of it comes down to us as veterans, right? And how we reintegrate with our communities, right? One of the biggest challenges is overcoming the broken veteran stigma, especially folk like us who deployed and went to combat and have the injuries and the long-term effects.
Cool prosthetic legs.
Right. And it is on us to continue to serve as ambassadors for the military to promote the value of service, to promote the individual role that citizens have in securing the democracy in which we live. And national service is a huge part of that. So we remain ambassadors for the Department of Defense, even though we're not official recruiters per se, but how we comport ourselves and not getting involved in that hyper partisan political discourse and continuing to promote critical thinking. And
because there's no win condition there either. There's just
exactly,
no
right. It's the same thing we talked about with the 20-year-long war, right? So clear, concise dialogue and being open to collaborating across this vast political spectrum of ours and how we can help rebuild that Americans' perception of the military and its long-term impact on our society. So never stop being an ambassador for the great things we did serving this country. That's my last bit.
You're a rock star, man.
That's exactly what we fought for. All right, alphas, don't forget to get your copy of Visual Friendly's Tally Target by the one and only Ethan Brown, aka Etan Browan. We're gonna make that stick. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today, Ethan. We're gonna have you back when you write your next trilogy.
Absolutely, I'm excited. Thank you.
Right. Stick around, alphas. We're gonna be back with some scuttlebutt, or as Joe likes to say, scuttlebooty.
Scuttlebooty.
As a Legionnaire and Army veteran, I'm proud the American Legion is an associate sponsor of the Army-Navy game presented by USAA. The American Legion is the first veteran service organization to sponsor America's game in its 125-year history. Through this sponsorship, we are honored to support the student athletes committed to protecting the freedoms we cherish. And we will continue to raise awareness about Be the One, our primary mission to end veteran suicide. Make sure you tune in to watch the greatest rivalry in sports, December 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern on CBS. To learn more, visit legion.org/Army-Navy game. Oh, and not that I'm biased, but go Army!
Be willing to show up for your veteran. Be willing to trust your gut, follow your heart, take a risk. Be willing to sit without saying a word, without checking the time, without trying to solve. Be the one willing to ask, to even offend another to keep them safe, to remind them they are valuable. Be the one to reach out and make them a part of your life.
Okay, alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some scuttlebooty.
I hope you took that time to read Joe's book while you were on your Kindle during the break.
Nice.
In the meantime, let's go down the Reddit rabbit hole for this week's Reddit rabbit hole. The title of the post I want to share for you: Random Ways People Got Out of Deployment. That's right. One of the posters asked if their supervisor could legally get them out of a deployment in their place, which got them thinking about some random ways people have gotten out of other deployments. With that being said, they'd love to hear other stories how UDMs or deployers or supervisors, disclaimer, they were not going to use names and personnels and bases. So here's some of the comments in the thread on Reddit. Prepare for some really great handles, by the way.
Hey, you guys.
That's right. At Hey You Guys responded. When I was UDM, I had someone fail CADM over and over who had marksmanship on their record. When I brought him in to be like, WTF, dude, started crying about how he didn't want to shoot people. I was like, you're a plumber and you're going to Kuwait. That's right.
He's a conscientious.
Yeah, right.
What's the term?
On, to which at hanging in there said, ha ha ha. As a member of CE and a current UDM, this is amazing. I'm betting this person wasn't even issued a weapon for the deployment from home station, let alone in country. True, hanging in there. Very true. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say, I can picture that guy coming back from deployment, sitting around his family, and he's like, I've seen some
I've literally like the plunger.
Literally, yeah, it's so bad.
My
it was everywhere.
Here we go. Okay, so which and of course, at the cable guy weighed in with
Caleb guy.
Caleb, you're right. His name's Caleb. Yeah. But that's a good play on words for that.
I like it too because it's a great movie. That montage.
I ended up replacing a guy who flagged the cadre 4 times, dropped his weapon, and cried while shooting. Like, dude, you had to do this in basic. Was friggin' blasted through, not so much the second time. Super boring. At Woody XP said, quote, a coworker of mine wrote a 4-page memorandum about why he couldn't go on a 15-month deployment and turned it into his supervisor. A few days later, the flight chief came around asking for a volunteer, and I volunteered because I wanted to get the hell out of there. I don't know what was in that memorandum, nor did I ever ask, but that was the most unique method I saw for getting out of one. Up until that point, guys getting injured and girls getting pregnant were the standard methods for avoiding deployment. At Confused Wolf wrote to Woody XP, I was posted with a guy in Qatar who a treatment of the OCNs and wrote a strongly worded email to the wing commander about it. He was sent back home not long after that. Listen, I've heard a lot of tropes about women getting pregnant. As a woman, I get a little flummoxed about this because I never got pregnant to get out of a deployment, and I think it's kind of crappy. And I have seen women in my unit get pregnant, not intentionally to get out of deployments either, and have been accused of getting pregnant on purpose, which I think is really crappy too. So
it's a really, awful thing to accuse somebody of something.
And to be really honest, I've seen women who have gotten pregnant unintentionally, because remember, fellas, it takes 2 to get pregnant. So
sometimes 3.
That's questionable. So honestly, in particular, and I'm going to share this story. I knew a woman who went through a lot of training, was gearing up to get on deployment, was really excited about it, and her husband went through a lot of fertility testing and was told he couldn't have children. She ended up pregnant, so it was by a miracle, and found out she was pregnant, and people in the unit came down on her hard. She got a lot of backlash, and she was devastated, and it took a real emotional toll on her, and it's something that still has an emotional impact, and we're talking like long-lasting negative effects. So having this sort of trope really can be negative. I wish people would just stop throwing that crap around. Please don't do that. Some women have done it, and it's not right, but I don't put it on a blanket statement. Please don't do that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
you can't put your whole life on hold when you go in the military. I mean, a lot of people still want to build a family. And unfortunately, that's a little more involved for a lady than it is for a guy. It requires a full-on deployment.
Well, someone, even like my sister, she was on birth control.
Yeah.
And she was getting ready to deploy. She did deploy, and she found out she was pregnant while on deployment.
And on birth control. Was it Nick Cannon?
You're funny. Yeah. Nick Cannon was the father. And she ended up having a miscarriage because she was a jet engine mechanic. She was exposed to a lot of stuff. Anyway, it's really hurtful, and these things can have lasting negative emotional effects. So Not to get all like depressing on what was meant to be a funny thread.
Yeah, I can't laugh now about anything.
Yeah, don't laugh at it, Joe. God dang it.
Vibes off.
But both parties are guilty. People want to get out of deployments. Some people don't. I never did. I loved going on deployment.
Yeah.
Sometimes deployments were really crappy, but for the most part, they were meaningful. I had made really great relationships. No regrets. Anyway,
I had a blast.
Literally, what did I?
Yeah.
Several times. Several times. Left a mark. A lot of places.
I have dropped that line a few times, and the difference between people who get it and don't get it is beautiful, because I wonder if later they get it and they're like, oh, he said
no, he didn't. Oh, yeah, he did. Anyway, join us on Reddit, you guys. You can get on the Reddit rabbit hole anytime with Tango Alpha Lima. Just go /r/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll be right there.
And maybe somebody can explain to me on there how do people get pregnant? I'm afraid to Google it.
That's going to take your parents and a very awkward conversation.
I'll call my mom later. All right. So it's been a few weeks since we've handed out a Bravo Zulu, but here's a good one. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, who I went to high school with, by the way, members of Hezi Griffiths Post 30 in Edgefield, South Carolina, were determined to ensure that their post comrades were safe and that their immediate needs were being met. The hurricane made landfall on September 26th, and by October 2nd, Post 30 Commander Winston Bodie, you remember the Breaking Point, or what was the movie with Keanu Reeves and?
Oh wait, are you talking about the one where they rob a bank?
Yeah, they rob several banks. They're good at it.
Break.
Yeah, Point Break. What was his name? Brody?
Total
Brody.
Name. Yeah.
But we'll go with Winston Bodie. All right. Had assembled a buddy check task force consisting of Post Adjutant Jane Doolittle. Oh, like you're going to get somebody named Doolittle to do something that important. This story, we need to vet this one.
I want that. Why do I have such a boring name? Jane Doolittle is rock star status.
It is kind of cool. Yeah. Cool. I knew a guy named Thaddeus Thornberry in school.
That sounds made up, but okay.
The only way you can have a name like Thad and not come across as an absolute D-bag is to have the last name Thornberry. It's the only way to recover the name. Thad, if you're out there, dude, I love you. I think about you all the time.
You emancipate yourself from your parents and you go out and you rename yourself.
If I was to pick my own name, Thornberry, yes, please.
That's like, what is it from Friends? She makes her own name and she names herself Banana Hammock.
I'm sure that was fulfilling. So with no electricity available at the post, the task force set up a table outside in daylight and went through the membership roster, calling each member using cell phones charged by car batteries. Those they reached were grateful to hear a friendly voice on the other end of the line. Some were busy cleaning up their properties, while others were lending a hand helping in the Edgefield community. Task force callers listened as members shared their storm experiences and passed along information about their neighbors. Did you see what Becky did? She stole my casserole dish. I don't think it was like that, though. No member of the post was left out of the buddy check. Post members living outside the area appreciated the updates from the community, and messages of support and offers of assistance were left with those who could not be immediately contacted. So Commander Bodie was happy to report that none of the members contacted experienced serious damage to their homes, although many were still without power, running water days after the storm. The road to recovery may be long, said Bodie, but we are all in this together. So Bravo Zulu to Post 30, as well as all the other points and posts across the areas hit by both Helene, who, again, I did go to high school with. She was nothing like that when I knew her. She was a good kid. So I don't know what went wrong. And Milton for stepping up your communities in thousands of ways over the past weeks. And to the post outside the areas hit, thank you for sending the support and assistance to your fellow veterans in the storm's path. And I've heard a lot of really heartwarming stories. I mean, all joking aside, the people that go through this, who have property damage and have lost loved ones, my heart absolutely goes out to you. I mean, this is something that it requires veterans to step up and take care of each other. And Post 30, really did that. So thank you for, sending your support and assistance to your fellow veterans in the storm's path, and for your donations to the National Emergency Fund and Temporary Financial Assistance Fund, which are two critical resources for veterans in need.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about that, you can visit Legiontown/buddy checks. And you can visit legiontown.org and the story will be there. The link will be in our show notes.
Along with the emergency Legion information as well, the emergency fund.
Yeah, that's a great way for the money to get channeled in for a really good cause. Bravo Zulu post 30. Final thoughts here. Get on the Reddit because we miss you guys.
Yeah.
If you've never been down the Reddit rabbit hole, join me in the mayhem because there's some really great, the handles alone that these people make up, you're going to crack up crying.
Yeah.
And
they're good.
There's nothing better than food for the soul in tears, you guys. All right, Alphas. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, send us some emails, guest recommendations, and all that other jazz at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. Hopefully by next week, Adam will be back with his techno song.
Yeah.
You want to beat us out? Give us a little tune. No. I don't know. I'm doing the Power Rangers theme song.
I don't know. Hey, I'm here for it. We love you guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah,